By my watch, it looks like it is 5 o'clock, so I'm going to start the webinar. For those of you on the phone, there are also people in the room, so whenever possible, I will relay the question in case you haven't heard it from the folks in the room. So for those of you in the room, I'm talking to a microphone, which is why I sound kind of weird. So it's going to be kind of wearing a dual hat here, conducting both an in-class Zoom and webinar training at the same time. So welcome to the basics of Excel kind of tutorial class, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to go through the agenda, but first, for those of the folks on the phone, I want to show you how you can participate. This is the GoToWebinar participant panel. There's a picture of it here. That orange button at the top allows you to maximize and minimize that panel. So if it's in your way and you need a little bit more room to see, you can click that orange button to get a little bit more room of what I'm showing on my slides here. And there's two ways you can participate. Your phone is muted by default. That is so in case somebody's talking in the background, there's not too much noise since there'll be a lot of folks on the phone. If you want to ask me a question via phone, which you can at any time during this presentation, just raise your hand and I'll unmute your telephone line. But what probably is the easiest for both of us is there's a chat box there under questions, and you can go ahead and chat your questions to me, and I'll answer them throughout the presentation. So for those of you on the phone, that's the way you can participate. Those of you in the room, you can just raise your hand or yell at me. Either way, I'm not that formal of an instructor, so feel free to ask questions throughout the session. Okay, so for those of you who filled out the webinar invitation, I asked a question, which was what version of Office were you using? I used Excel to gather that data and put together this chart, which we'll go through. But what I wanted to show is that all of my demonstrations today are going to be in Office 2010 for the PC. While the view may look different at certain times, and I'll try and highlight that as much as I can, all of the features are universal to all the versions of the suite. Just the way you get to them might be a little different. So when I can and when I remember, I'll try and illustrate what those differences may be. But if you look, 72% of you are using Office 2007 or later, which Office 2010, all the features I'm going to show you are the same in Office 2007. Does that make sense? All right, looks like we already have a raised hand on the phone. Go ahead, your line is now unmuted. And forgive me, Naga.
Hi, sorry, I may have accidentally clicked on that.
Hello? Okay, I will, Naga, if you want to chat your question, I can't hear you on the phone. Go ahead and write me a chat. Okay. Any questions so far other than what I covered about the version? And we're going to show you how I put together this pretty little chart here as well. So here's the agenda. This is truly a basics Excel kind of tutorial. I'm just going to introduce you to the tool. Some of you have probably used it before, but I have gotten feedback from folks who've never even opened it before. So this is the first time they're using Excel. So there may be parts where they'll be boring for some, new to others. I'll do the best I can to keep the pace going. The critical factor of Excel, everybody asks about is formula, so we're going to cover that. Let me remute all the lines here. We have a chat question. Yes, I can mute the line. So someone asked me, can you mute the lines? And yes, they are all muted by default, so nobody should be hearing anybody else. Okay? This is going to be a fun lesson. So I'm going to cover finding the formulas you need, how to get to them, leveraging a formula wizard, which is just my name for it. So I'll cover what Microsoft's name is, but I think mine's better. And some good formulas to know. I'm also going to cover pivot tables, which is particularly important for use in the statistics course. It's something that's going to be covered. So I'm just going to introduce you to it. It's going to go in a lot more depth than your class because it is quite a robust tool. and there's no way I could cover it in an hour. I could spend 2 hours just on pivot tables alone. And additionally, I'll be handing out additional resources. So for those of you in the room, you already have that handout in your hand. Those of you on the phone, this is for you. I will be emailing it to you after this presentation. So that is a list of some helpful links that I've come to gather in preparation for this session. Any questions on that so far? Okay. Hearing none, we'll move on. So Excel can be intimidating for a lot of folks. Probably, and this is just a guesstimate, I've never taken a statistics course, so I've never taken a study formally in this, but about 2/3 of the folks that I talk to are really intimidated by the software. They look at it and go, I'll never get this. I never understand it. And part of the reason for that is that Excel is a jack-of-all-trades data analysis tool. The majority of folks, over 90% of 5% of what's in Excel, you're not going to need. They're specialized for engineers, professional statisticians, programmers. So there are a lot of tools in Excel. So what I'm going to try and illustrate today is there are some really helpful tools that can get you started, but you don't need to know everything that's in there. The other thing that when I talk to folks that's really intimidating about Excel is it's pretty much a math-based tool. I mean, if math was kind of one of your sore subjects back in your undergrad days, Excel can be really intimidating. Because while Excel can do calculations for you and it simplifies the math, it doesn't give you the principles or doesn't teach you how to do it. So you pretty much have to know what calculation you're trying to accomplish to get Excel to do it. Does that make sense? So let's just start with math basics in Excel. Excel can do your principal math functions: addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. However, in Excel, and what I have on the chart here, you have to use special characters to get those things to happen, not the way you would write it out in class. So you can see here, addition and subtraction, pretty self-explanatory. But the star key is what's used for multiplication, which is found right above the 8 key. So if you hit Shift 8, the number 8, that's the key you're looking for. And the / is for division. So that's the end of the PowerPoint. I'm going to go right into Excel and kind of show you around so that you're not bored by what I'm doing. So here's what I wanted to show you. Math in Excel works like it does in real life. So how many of you, if you want to raise your hands on the phone, remember order of operations in your math class? So parentheses, all those rules apply in Excel. So if you put parts of your formula, your math equation in Excel, in parentheses, it's going to follow those first before it does the rest of the formula. So you kind of have to know your math. You got to brush yourself up on those rules in order to do math in Excel. So you have to know real math. So great. I have some hands raised, people who remember that. Okay. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to chat as well. Excel is also algebraic-based. So here's, I told you, showing you currently 2 examples of how you can accomplish the same result. So the first thing I'm doing on this first line here, and let me highlight it, is I'm just adding 4 plus 2. We know that's going to be 6, but I did it 2 different ways. One is I typed my formula. Formulas in Excel always start with the equal sign. Just doing regular math, 4 plus 2. And if I switch over, you can see that equals 6. But also using your algebra, remember A plus B equals C? I'm doing something similar here. So I'm saying equals, you always start an Excel formula with equals, whatever in cell B2 plus whatever in cell C2. Does that make sense to everybody? Anybody follow that? So instead of actually putting a solid number in there, I'm telling it a cell. Now, cells, for those of you who may not know, in Excel are each of the individual boxes. They're identified by their row and their column. Rows are numeric. Columns are alphanumeric. So it starts over at A1, goes on for thousands of rows and thousands of columns. So again, why would I want to do this? Well, what if my data changed? Here, if this first number becomes a 6 plus 2, I have to go back in my formula and change it and do 6 plus 2 to get the new result. But all I have to do here is edit the 6, and now my result has changed. So you can see it's now 8. Still the old-fashioned way, still 6. So that, again, these are basic principles. Some of you, this may be really slow for, but this is kind of the genesis of how formulas start in Excel. Any questions so far? So let's get into a more tangible example. Now, I'm going to split some hairs here with some terminology. Many people refer to formulas as these keywords here. So if I go in and type the word sum, and I type all these keywords here, that's the formula. Excel's real word for that is called a function. Formula is anything you start with an equal sign. Why am I telling you this with this more in detail? When you're looking up the online help, if you look for formulas, sometimes it may not come up with the results you're looking for. Function is the other side of what formula is. So a formula is anything that you start with an equal sign. What a function is, and what most people think of a formula, is a shortcut. It's taking something that you could do longhand and simplifying it using a keyword. Let me go back to this example for a second. So one of the most popular formulas is the sum formula. I'm sure some of you have heard that before. I'm sorry, function. I'm doing it myself. I still have to break myself in my habit of using the word formula. So I would type equals sum. Okay. And this is something new to Excel 2010, and I'm pointing it out so that those of you using other versions may not see this, is that you can click to finish the formula, remember the function, and I'm going to really stop myself doing that. If you also want to do it another way, you see this little button here that says FX, everybody, I'm highlighting that. It brings up a nice little big, what I call the wizard, which is actually called the function arguments window. Don't call it that, call it the wizard. It's much easier. It's my name for it. And all I have to do is highlight the cells that I want to sum, which, what is sum doing? Has all the numbers in a range of cells. Does that make sense? See a couple crowds in the room. Not seeing any questions online, so I hope that makes sense. So you can see I still get the same result. Okay? So it took something I could do longhand. I could do add the plus sign. So if I had 50 numbers, I could do cell A1 plus 50, plus A2, plus A3, plus A, keep going. All I have to do in the sum is type the word sum, highlight them, and I'm done. So it's what these functions do is simplify activities for you. So here's another practical example. Because we're an education institution, of course I had to do a grade book. So in my class here, I have my homework grade for each of the students. I have a midterm grade and a final. And my final course grade is an average of those scores. That's how I've chosen as an instructor to deal with them. So I could type equals this cell plus this cell plus this cell divided by 3. But there's a function built into Excel to do that. How would I know that is the question I always get. How do I know what's in there? How do I find what I'm looking for? Here's how you can do that. In Excel 2007, 2010, you will see an insert function button in this location. There is also an insert function button in all of the other versions. It just won't be exactly here. But by using the insert function feature, it brings up this little box. And it says, type in a brief description of what you want to do, and then click go. So you could type in a whole phrase. I want to average my grade. Okay? And when I click go, it's going to try and figure out, based on the keywords in there, what it is, what formula, or I'm sorry, function I would use to best accomplish this. Now, obviously, this is a pretty simple example. Most of you could have figured this one out. But I'm illustrating how easy this can be done for anything. But it also goes back to my point that you do need to know what it is you're trying to do in order for Excel to find it. You know, if your keywords are off, Excel may not give you exactly what you're looking for. So you kind of have to know the math behind what the magic, for lack of a better phrase, behind what you're trying to do before you can find something. So in this case, what I want is the first result display, but it might not always be. So as I scroll through each of the options in this box, right underneath, I'm moving my mouse over it, it gives you a verbatim description of what it is that function will do for you. So the d-average averages the values in a column or a list or database. Now you're not using a database, so right away you go, I don't need that one. So again, the first one listed here is what I want to do, which is average the original. Sorry, I'm not going to even try to pronounce that word, it's going to come out wrong. But the meaning of its arguments. Okay. Does that make sense how to find what you're looking for? Okay. So in this case, I'm going to click OK. And then it brings me to the function arguments window, again, what I call the wizard, in order to complete the formula forming, or the function forming. So back in the days of Office, early Office 98, 2000, a lot of times you were taught, I have to type all this out, I have to know all the keywords, I have to know where to put the parentheses. What you can see is that in the newer versions, by using this function arguments window, all I have to do is highlight what it is I want to do. Tell those the rest of the word for me. It already typed in the word average, it already put the parentheses, and it put the colon in the right place. So nowadays, there's a lot less you have to do as far as knowing, okay, this is how I type a formula. Do I put a column here? Do I put this there? A function, I'm sorry. I just learned this whole difference between formula and function this week, actually, and I've been doing Excel for years. So all of us can learn something. So I'm going to click OK here. And my result is displayed. So the average for a student, John Smith, is graded a 6.67%. Okay. Now, if I want to make this happen for the rest of them, I can just take this little corner here, so you can see my crosshair turns into like a plus sign, and drag this down. And it automatically corrects the formula for me to give me the average for each one of my students. So far, so good? So I may want to do some additional calculations on this. So I may want to figure out what's the average grade for the entire class, and what was their average score. So again, I could use the insert function, and the last formula function I use is the first one displayed. I could also search for it again. In this case, I don't have to. Just I want to average something. But this time it didn't automatically try and figure out for me what I want to average because there's nothing around it. So I want to average everybody's final course grade. All I have to do is highlight an entire list. And so it automatically put in there for me F2 to F6. And there's the average course grade for all students. I have an average of 81%. Everybody got to be, on average, it's a B-. Any questions so far on the basics? So I mentioned I'm going to give you some of the key functions that you should be using in Excel, the ones that most people use. Well, Excel already does that for you. So on the Formulas tab here in Excel 2007, 2010, for others of you, there may not be this, but there's an auto sum button. These are the most popularly used functions. Sum, which is adding a range of cells together. So you just highlight, I want to add all these together. All right, I have a question on the chat. I see you. I'll be with you in a second. Average, count numbers. So you can count the number of cells that have numbers in them. I'm going to show you an even better, the maximum value or the minimum value. So those are the functions that are used quite frequently. Here's the next level. Each of these categories have what are called conditional statements. They're also called if statements. So I could add values if they're equal to something. And I'm going to show you an example of what I mean in a second here. Let me get to the chat question. Will you have samples of the past 18 minutes? It took me 28 minutes to get in the webinar. I'm recording this webinar, and we plan to post it on Lake Forest MBA's YouTube channel sometime, probably a week after the session. So yes, we'll send an email out when it's posted as well. But this whole session is being recorded. So good question. So for those of you in the room, if there's something you missed, and those of you on the phone, you can go back and we're going to have this on YouTube. So what I mentioned before was this idea of do something if a condition exists. So in this case, I want to count if somebody passed the course. Okay. So far, so good. So for me, passing the course, I'm a very strict instructor, means that you got an 80% or higher. Okay. So here's how I can accomplish that using a function in Excel. So let me go back in here. So I'm going to say count if higher than 80%. So that didn't give me what I was looking for. I could probably find it. Yeah, there we go. So you can see that this tool is not perfect. I did want to illustrate that. So I typed in some words, and to find what I'm looking for, I have to go pretty far through this list. So it's not perfect. It helps, but it's not perfect. So you can see here, here's a count formula. Let's read that for a second. It says count the number of cells in arrays that contain numbers. Is that exactly what I'm looking for? No. Because I want to count it if a value exists. So I keep using that word if. So another question from the chat window is, do you have quick tips that you can email that has tips in a print format? I don't currently have a print version of this. What I do have, and which you'll be receiving after the session, which you missed by coming in a little late, was there's a handout with some helpful links to websites, but I don't have a one-page handout currently. It's something we're looking into, but it's hard to kind of sum this up because everybody's version is different. And what I show you in one version may not be specific enough for all the versions. So it is a hard thing to do, but good question. Thank you for asking. All right, so let me go back to this example here, which, because I know Excel, don't expect to get as fast as I got here. I know what I'm looking for is I want to count something if a value exists. Okay, so far. So here's what it is. Count the number of cells in an array that meet a certain condition. So I'm going to click OK. And again, this wizard is very helpful because it has two required, and I know they're required because it's in bold, inputs that I need. And it tells me what it wants from each one of them. So range. It's a range of cells that you want to count. Okay? So in this case, I'm going to count the final course grade. Why? It's because I'm looking for who got over 80%. Okay? So I'm looking at their course grade, and it looks at them one at a time. And my core criteria, again, going back to your math, is going to be greater than 79%, or 0.79 if you're using math. Does that make sense so far? Yes, question in the room.
Now, I only got value 1 and value 2. I don't have range criteria in my version.
Hopefully, everybody, my microphone fell off, so somebody on the phone should have told me that I wasn't being heard. So you're in the count formula. We're looking at the count if formula.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Yeah, feel free to yell at me if my microphone drops off my lapel again. I'm surprised you guys could still hear me. Hopefully you hear me a little bit better now. Okay, so I'm going to do this here. And you can see it worked. Look at that. I mean, because this is a short list, I can count those and see, sure enough, 2 people got over 79%. Now, why did I do over 79%? Anybody math wizards? Because I wanted to include 80 as a pass value. So it was anything greater than 79%. I could have done greater than or equal to 80%. You could do it either way. But in this case, just to simplify things, I did greater than 79%. Okay? Who's ready for some advanced? Okay, everybody's just so excited. I get excited about this. I love Excel. And by no means am I consider myself an expert yet, but it's a great tool. So here's something else that you can do with a conditional-based formula. It doesn't have to be value-based. It could be text-based. So here's an example. I want to write the word pass or fail, depending on if, again, the key word, this whole if thing comes up a lot, a certain, if they pass the course. So I'm going to use another very helpful formula or function called if. And I'm just going to skip the search part because I think you may have got that by now. So this is advanced, so some of you may lose you. So in this case, it's a logical test, which is any expression that could be evaluated true or false. So this is, for me, this is what I want to do. I want to look at John Smith's grade and his grade only, because we're going to look at each student one at a time. And how do I want to evaluate his score? If it is greater than 0.79, okay? So this is my calculation part. I'm saying, okay, is his score higher than 79%? Then what the strength of the if formula is, this basic if function, I should get like a buzzer that says every time I say the word formula. I can tell it what to do if it's true. I can tell it what to do if it's false. Now, when you get really advanced, like some folks do, you can have it doing more calculations. I'm going to do a simple, basic yes or no. So if is greater, I'm going to say, write the word pass. Now, you notice I put quotations around the word pass. Anytime in a formula that you're doing a non-numeric value, meaning text, you have to put quotations around it. Otherwise, it tries to read it as a number. Most of the time, Excel will auto-correct for you. And the key word in that sentence is most of the time. So don't take the chance. And so if the value is false, they failed the course. Okay? Make sense so far? So, hey, look, he passed. Just like I did before, I can take this little crosshair, copy this all the way down, and you can see, I can see the word pass fail based on that condition. Yes?
How many digits hit? Once you highlighted the box, all you did is hit enter, hit enter.
Actually, I let go of my mouse click. So, yep. Good question. So the question was, how did I finish that off? It's by letting go of my left mouse click. Any questions on the phone? Hopefully some people are still there. Let me check if anybody's still on the phone. Yep, they are. Okay, good. All right, let me jump over to example number 2 here. Again, I'm just going to show you some simple functions. There are many more, and I'll show you how to get help on them as well after this. So in this case, here's just another example. Again, I'm going to use the same formula or function. This is something you may run into at work. You have an event you're hosting. You host an event at home. You have 25 guests coming, and you want to see if they're coming or not. So I've been tracking that all along, and you can see some people are coming, some people are not. So I want to find out how many people said yes. So now I'm not evaluating a number. I'm evaluating an actual word. So I'm going to use the same function, which is count if. Okay, that's the same. That hasn't changed any. My range is going to be this row here. But now I can actually, just to illustrate, I can use a word. So I'm just saying if it equals yes. Okay, so I just typed the word yes in there. And what it already did is you can see it's going to be an idea of what my formula result would be. And you can see there's 18 folks. Now, as you're discovering new functions, so I just showed you a few today and some of the admittedly simple ones. If you run into, okay, I really don't know what I'm doing here, I can't follow the directions, in the corner of this function arguments window, again, what I call the wizard, is this help on this function. This is, again, applicable to all versions. What this does when you click on it, it brings up Microsoft's help page, specifically for that function. And I actually agree this is very good. I will not always agree that instructions that Microsoft gives are good. I do not work for Microsoft, so I will be honest when it's good and bad. Gives you good examples of not only how to set it up, what it does, and the actual definitions, goes through countless examples of how you may use this in practice. So that's what I recommend you do. When you're discovering these new functions and you're discovering new things and looking, definitely use the help on this function hyperlink. Now, what I also wanted to show you, I clicked on the Insert Function button, that same window that I used to search for them. It's here as well. So if I'm going through these and I'm like, is that hour one really something I'm looking for? I click on Help. It brings me to the hour function and shows me what it is that it does. Hopefully some of you picked up some tips there on functions in general. My last kind of parting words on this is one of the things that Excel 2007 and later did really nicely that the old version didn't do and still don't do is really makes that clear definition of what it is these functions are meant to be used for. So if you look at the function library here at the top, they have bucketed them together by the type of function that they are. So logical, meaning this is where you're going to find those logic-based evaluations, true, false, if. What they do then, which is what is better, is so all the financial functions are all categorized together. So if you're an accountant, these might be helpful for you. If you're not an accountant, you're going to look at those and go, what would I even use that for? So my parting point is there's a lot in here. You really don't need very much of it. This Excel can quickly overwhelm you with the number of options available. Now, I'm a computer programmer in training. I use a lot of stuff in here that you guys probably would never even need to use. So let me give you an example of that. This date and time feature, I use it all the time, but in a practical life, you're not going to need any of this stuff. This is for me to write when I'm writing computer programs to slice out the minute from a long date. I may say January 1st at 1:31 p.m. I just want 31. So that's where I'd use a function like that. So the bottom line is really what you're going to need are pretty much what I showed you today and maybe just a little bit more. Now in the statistics class, which I talked to the instructor ahead of time, anything that they're going to cover specifically for that course will be kind of tutorial. So the purpose of this is just to give you the fundamentals to find the answers. But he will be tutorialing anything that's specific to the class. So for example, I know we were talking about earlier, there's a data analysis toolkit that you're going to be required to install. That will be covered in the course, specifically how to use that. But hopefully by walking out of here today, you'll be a little bit more comfortable navigating through Excel to use that tool. Your instructor will cover exactly how he expects that to be used in the course. Any questions before I move on to the next section on functions? I will give 20 seconds for those folks on the phone to ask one, and we'll move on. All right, hearing and seeing none. One of the topics that's going to come up in the statistics course, so for those of you who are taking accounting, I don't know if there are any of you on the phone, this may not come up yet. While it will be covered in class, I wanted to intro it to you today, which is pivot table. So one of the things I found when I was trying to figure out how to teach pivot tables is, don't always trust Wikipedia, but Wikipedia has a good kind of summary here to help us get started. So I'm just going to read through their first paragraph here, which it says, in data processing, a pivot table is a data summarization tool found in data visualization, try and say that out loud, programs such as spreadsheets or business intelligence software. Among other functions, pivot table can automatically sort, count, total, or give the average of data stored in one table or spreadsheet. It displays the results in a second table called a pivot table showing summarized data. So let me stop right there. So in essence, what they said there is this just a tool that takes a long data set and summarizes things for you. That's in essence what it does. What you'll see is you'll quickly get overwhelmed by it because it is a little, while it gives you the options, sometimes too many options can be a bad thing. It's a really powerful tool, but it takes a long time to master, and admittedly, I still haven't mastered it. I've been working in them for a couple years now, and I still haven't quite mastered them. So let me give you the basics to that. So what I just did here is I have a data sheet. Now this one is short enough that I could probably do a lot of this through formulas or by hand. But again, for illustration purposes, start small, and then I'll move to a bigger example. So I highlighted my entire data source here. So a data source is just a selection of cells. So I have some first names, some last names, their city, their gender, their current salary, and the year I hired them. So again, this is a fictional example of some employees at a company I'm working for. So I've highlighted them. I'm on the Insert tab. So again, this only applies to 2007, 2010 folks. You'll find it as well in other versions. I'm going to insert a pivot table. And it brings up a wizard, which if I hadn't already done it, I could select right in this wizard where I want this, but I already have. And I want this available in a new worksheet. Here's my pivot table. It's empty. So the power of a pivot table is you can fill it using drag and drop capabilities to dynamically, what we called earlier, summarize and slice data. The power of it is I don't have to change my original data to get different results. Here's what I mean by that. So let me go with an example here. I want to see how many people live in a particular city. Okay? So I'm going to take this city field here, my field list in the pivot table, and drag it into the values. So what it's doing is counting. Currently, all it's counting is the number of people that have a city, which is 20. That's my list. So if we go back to my list, here we go. You can see there are 20 people on the list. Makes sense? So it adds up. Well, now how do I see it by what city they live in? There are two areas here, column labels, which would sort my data based on the column, left to right, or if I want to do it up and down as a row label. So I want to drag, again, I'm using the same value, city, into the row labels. So now it automatically slices it out, still gives me the total result of 20, but says there are 5 people in Atlanta, 9 people in Chicago, and 6 people in New York. I didn't have to do any formulas. It did it all for me. So the power then of a pivot table is that I can take that one level further. So now I want to see what is the breakdown of males and females living in a particular city. So I'm going to take gender, drag it below, and it tells me in Atlanta there's 2 females, 3 males. So what you can probably see here is relatively quickly you can get a whole lot of information from one very boring list of data. So again, this is just an introduction to the pivot table itself. Any question on the concept of what it does and the basic manipulation of it? Now, as I mentioned in the course, you're going to go into very specific. I looked at the case that they use this in, and they'll walk you through what it is they're going to look for as far as results, and they'll kind of give you clues to how to do it. Yes, there's a question in the room.
Is the pivot table actually in the options section? May not have downloaded, right?
Pivot tables are in Excel by default. So what you're seeing, and this is a good question. So the question for those of you on the phone was, pivot tables is an additional set? No, it's in Excel by default. You find it under the Insert tab. But in Excel 2007 and 10, and I should say the Mac versions as well, anytime you're using a specialized tool, like a pivot table, it brings up a menu of options over here on that I'm circling with my mouse, this purple option, that applies specifically to that tool. So watch when I click away from the pivot table, that box disappears. So it's the same applies if I were to insert a picture. Let's see, hopefully I got to, I'm going through my pictures here. You can see picture tools shows up in the menu. And that's something that happens in 2007, 2008, 2010, 2011. So in other versions, all of the tools are available to you all the time. In Excel, or I should say in the Office suite, not just Excel, the specialized tools only appear when you need them. A question from chat line. What is the purpose of the report filter? Let me go back into, so the report filter is a way to dynamically change the pivot table again. So another way to summarize it based on the criteria that you drop into the report filter. So let me drop in city and move that into there. So now I'm just getting a basic breakdown of female to male because I took city out and now it's a report filter. Where it shows up here is now at the top. You can see city and the filter is now set to all. So let me filter the results by Chicago. So then it gives me the female male breakdown for Chicago only. It's hiding, not deleting, and that's the key word, the other data. Does that help? I didn't catch the name of the person who chatted that question. But hopefully that helps explain what that. So again, all of the tools in the pivot table are just ways to help you analyze your data. Yes, thank you. Good. Okay, I'm glad I answered the question right. So let me go into, unless there's any other questions, an actual example of something I use on a daily basis where I implement pivot tables. So I work for the graduate school. I didn't formally introduce myself. My name's Rob Retzer, for those who can see it, and I am the desktop support person for the school. I do the training for the staff here. So one of my responsibilities is to track the tickets that come in and the different problems. So I use Excel to do that. So I gather data, and I've been gathering it for almost 2.5 years now, from one long, and all I want to show you with this is it's a really long and really complicated piece of data. So you could, there are over almost 3,000 tickets entered in here. So this is where this stuff starts coming into play. There's no way I'm going to count 3,000 entries. So I may want to analyze my data to look for trends. Okay? So I use a pivot table for that. And here's how it helps me in real life. So I've already kind of pre-set up my data. So I cheated a little bit, so I didn't take too much of your time. But in my case, I just want to count the number of tickets that apply to a different category. So I just had to count if it was blank or not. So I just happened to choose a field at random. So I just chose my field, which is called issue type, which is what when I evaluate what kind of issue is it. Was it a software issue? Was it a hardware issue? Et cetera, et cetera. And I just counted it. So if it wasn't blank, it got counted. Does that make sense so far? And that's where I got the total of, well, I said almost 3,000, so I lied. It's just over 2,500. 2,553 tickets total. I also want to evaluate things by percentage. So I just took the same number, and you can see I'm left-clicking on percentage, and see where it says value field settings. I click on that here. I gave it the name percentage, so that didn't come up by default. I had to give it that name, so it's not something built in. And again, you look, I'm pulling from issue type, same one. I'm counting the same values, and I'm counting it. But why does it show up as a percentage? See the button here, number format? I click on here, and I tell it to be a percentage. Now, it defaults back to general every time I do this, but I wanted to evaluate as a percentage. Even more detailed, there's different ways where you can take percentage of a total, percentage difference of. I won't get into that because that's pretty advanced, but there's a lot of options there is what I wanted to highlight. So I'm just looking at flat out 2,553 tickets. That's 100% of them. Okay, that's pretty useless. But now what I can do is take my individual fields, and what I want to show you is you can use the same field multiple times. So I'm going to take this issue type. I'm going to drag it into my row labels. So now instantly it takes my data, all 2,500 entries, and gives me some valuable information. 31% of my tickets are software or configuration issues. 12% of them are training and product questions. So I'm getting valuable data at the click of a mouse out of my pivot table. So I don't have to count through and write formulas for 2,500 entries. It does it for me dynamically. And so if I'm in a meeting with my boss and he goes, well, I see there's 31% of our tickets are software errors. Well, what product is causing that? So I go, okay. I happen to check track that as well. So you can see here's application product. So I just drag that in, and now it breaks down. Not only does it give me the level of, okay, that's software. Here's the product that caused those particular errors. So you can see Outlook tends to be the most troublesome product for us, and probably most of the world. But I can get valuable data. I can be in a meeting with my manager and go, he asked me a question, and within seconds I can give him an answer. Now I had to, the caveat of that is I had to track my data well. I have good data in, good data out. You've probably heard that, and now probably the first lesson you hear in the statistics course is good. If you get good data in, you get good data out. You get bad data in, you're going to get bad data out. So part of it is setting up your data right. But pivot tables can be a really valuable tool if leveraged correctly. And I can't stress enough, it'll take practice. Some trainers will say, it's easy, you'll figure this out in no time. I'm the kind of guy who says, I work with enough people to know this isn't easy. It's going to take you a little practice. And definitely don't be afraid to play around. A lot of times what I do is I just open up something, start, and make a copy of it. So if I'm working with a real set, I make a copy of it, play with it, and screw it up as much as I want, and then just delete that copy. And then when I figure out what I want to do, I go back to the reel and want to do it. Rather than losing all my work, I make a copy of things that I'm working on. Good. We have a chat question. You have the names of the field from the original table. Yes. So how did I get the field names, and how did they come into this pivot table field list would probably be the question you're asking. When I set up my data, this top row here I designated as my header row, and I'm scrolling through over that here. That's where the field names are coming from. Now, what you can see here is that when you look at my pivot table, there's probably 50 of them. You're only seeing a few. I'm hiding a lot of data because this is a really long spreadsheet. You can see I'm in column AJ, so I'm using tons of columns. The reason you don't see them is they're hidden from view. But there's a lot of data and a lot of calculations. This is a very complicated spreadsheet, which is why I purposely hid the complicated stuff. But that's where what I said earlier is Excel is a jack of all trades tool. Don't get overwhelmed by what it can do. Ease yourself into it by what you're comfortable with. If you're, I'm learning computer programming and I'm comfortable with that, that's not going to be comfortable for everyone. So don't worry about it unless it's comfortable for you. So looks like Rachel has her hand raised. So I'm going to unmute your line. Go ahead. Rachel? Oh, yeah, this via chat as well. Okay. How long does it take you to put in all the data? So in this particular example that I'm showing you, I've written a computer program that enters the data for me. So a lot of what you see here is automatically generated from my email. So I cheat, basically. But in a spreadsheet of this nature, it could be really time-consuming. Now, this is also 2.5 years worth of data, so it's not all entered at once. At the school here, you can actually see it. I average about 4 tickets a workday, so it's not really high. Don't have a lot of problems on an average day. So the volume is not intensive all at once for me in this particular one. A lot of times when you'll get big volume data when you'd want to use a pivot table, and that's a good question, Rachel, is you'll be getting that data directly from a database within your company. And in the case of people in class, your instructor will be providing you with a large set of data. So you won't be typing it. You'll be just analyzing it. It's another chat question. If you change data in the pivot table, does it change in the main table too? No is the answer to that. Good question. So the pivot table is an analysis tool. It doesn't change values for you. It doesn't edit values for you. It just reports on the values that are there. So back to my point of good data in, good data out. If your data is good in its original form, will only be when the pivot table is really helpful. Is it dynamic? Sure. So the question, so if you might have been asking this, is the pivot table dynamic? The answer is sort of. It is, except you have to tell it to be. So in the pivot table options and in the other versions, there's this refresh button. So let me just do something here. Let me add one additional ticket. And just to show you that, I'm just going to make something up. Let's just, why don't I just copy this last one here and make it. Come on. So I added one ticket. So let me get it back down to where you can see this happen. Field. I love technology. Come on, anytime. There we go. So if you remember, and I'm not lying, but you have to take my word for it. I had 2,553 tickets, but I added one, so it should be 2,554. Until I refresh that data, it won't change dynamically. So yes and no, is it dynamic? Not automatically. But yes, you can. All I have to do is say refresh, and it's done. Now I created a little button for me to do that. You can see that there. That I made myself. So if you want to know how to do macros, somebody see me offline, and I can show you how to do macros. But that's how I did that. So I just have to click that button. So another question and raised hand on the. Let me get the raised hand. Still Rachel. Okay. I'll lower your hand. I think next time we should probably do this just on the webinar. Can you add extra rows or columns in a pivot table? You don't have to. Again, the rows and columns that you see in the pivot table are determined by your data and the rows and labels that you put in there. So yeah, I can put more in. So let's see, what's a good one? So I can say I want to see now breakdown by issue type, then by the application, then by the department. Or probably what makes more sense to start with the department, then go. You can do as many as you want in the row labels, and it'll keep slicing the data that way. Now, from a practical standpoint, if you get more than 3 layers deep, your head may explode because you're going to be looking at it, and it's just going to be you can't decipher anything out of it. So from a practical standpoint, you typically stated just a few row labels. But all of this information is dependent on my source data. So if I only had 3 types of issue types, so if these were my only 3, that's the only number of rows I would see. So it's all dependent on what it's coming from. Hopefully that makes some sense. So we have another raised hand. Okay, I'll unmute your line. Again, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing it, but is it Naga? I don't hear you, Naga, but look at another question came in. When you change the criteria for the pivot table, does it the old? Oh, so how do you make multiple pivot tables from the same data source? It's very easy to do that. You just keep inserting pivot tables until you, as many as you want, it can refer to the same data source. The data source is the data source. So it doesn't matter how many pivot tables you make out of it. Now, again, the strength of the pivot table and its purpose is it should be one pivot table because you can change your reports on the fly to get you the information you need. So I could print this if I needed to keep it for archival purposes. Now, some folks I know don't like to have to reslice their data every time. So I want to just analyze data 3 specific ways, and I just want it static like that. So then you may want to create multiple pivot tables. But a lot of times what you're looking to do there is maybe make a chart out of that. So in this, again, this is a real example. I've created new sheets that calculate things by difference. And this, I won't go through this one because it's really complicated how it works. But I'm still using one data source to count, and you can see there's a really long formula in here. Don't worry about how that one works. That counts things for me and analyzes my data so that I can get these pretty little charts here. But good question. All right, let me go to the question things here. I'm going to start deleting some of them. So, any other questions? We're doing really good on time. So I have 4 more minutes for questions. I'm happy to stay around. Again, this webinar is then recorded, so it'll be posted on YouTube. I think someone from our Student Services Department will probably send it out to you. But I'm happy to stick around for questions, and I can stick around till about 6:15. But otherwise, thanks for listening. Hopefully you picked up a few tips today. As I mentioned earlier, for those of you who came like good, we have a question on ICU in the chat. Thanks for the thanks. And yes, we will send the YouTube link out. There's a handout that came with this, so for those of you who are on the phone, I can see who you are. I got your email addresses. I'll email that handout out to you. So there's a handout with some helpful links and some websites that you can refer to for more information. But believe it or not, and not all of this doesn't always have, but Microsoft's Office Help site is very helpful. It may take you a while to read through it because they sometimes give you more information than you need, but it is pretty straightforward nowadays. They have video tutorials as well as the traditional walk through your own lessons, and then just paper handouts on here's how you do something. So again, I'll stay around till about 6:15 if anybody has any questions, but thanks for listening. Yes, Lisa, I'll send you the information in email. Yep, I'll send it, probably expect it mid-afternoon tomorrow.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Again, if you guys want any questions, let me know. Happy to answer. So